for this portion, and I'll share my screen. All right, so I thought it'd be good. Last week in this meeting, we talked about the week 1 Wendy material, and I thought it would be a great opportunity, and I warned everyone by email this would be happening, to talk about our feelings and understanding feelings about writing. So to kick off, for everyone who's gone through this, and if you haven't, just think of it on the spot, what feelings come up for you when you contemplate writing? Don't be shy, or I'll just call on people.
Feel intimidated.
Why is that, Monica?
Because I am unsure whether my style of writing is acceptable to academic writing, to scholarly writing. I am unsure how to improve in a way such that my articles get published.
Who else?
I'll speak for me. I get really caught up in I call it overstimulation. Like it feels so, there's like so many things I need to think of. There's so many things I need to balance in my head. So many arguments I need to make sure that I communicate correctly, or ideas that I need to tie together, that becomes, like a really kind of bad anxiety of like, I can't, it's too much. Like I can't handle it all. And so then that discourages me from writing.
I feel like it's kind of therapeutic. It's my way to sort through my thoughts and write through. I actually find it very calming and relaxing.
I'm going to, this is Stacey, I'm going to second Andreas's feelings. I get overwhelmed. I have a problem pulling things out of my head. I know what I want to say, but it's just so much. And I get word jumble, or is it word vomit?
Yes,
I'll share, and I'm.
Go
ahead, Holly.
Oh, I was just going to say I can relate to what Monica said about like, I mean, that's just been a general thing for me in terms of, does the voice sound right? And like, I remember when I first started, I couldn't even write like self-efficacy without feeling ridiculous because it just sounded, it was so different in terms of the verbiage, but now I'm feeling much more comfortable with that. I don't know. I don't have a lot of trouble with psyching myself out or getting anxious. I get frustrated because I want to write down 5 different things at once. Like I have so many proposals in my head that I literally have not had time to like start putting down. Do you know what I mean? Onto paper. So I've developed I've started doing this where I've got Scrivener, which is sort of like it organizes it in any way that you want, a paper, research project or whatever. So I've started like jotting down notes and putting things into an organizational system that I can come back to later when I've just got like, oh, this is what, blah, 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 blah. So that's kind of how I'm dealing with that. But I struggle with that.
I'm new in the class, so it's nice to hear everybody and see some familiar faces. I think I get excited and then I get filled with a lot of overwhelm. And like Holly said, I have a lot of ideas, and then I get filled with fear and a little bit of dread of picking the right idea. And because I have ADHD, then I'm afraid I'm going to get distracted or I'm not going to follow through. So I have to be really disciplined in staying on track, which then has its own challenges.
I have to say, I'm hearing like something to me that's important, which is that we have so many different things in our heads. And I think it is the hardest thing to sit down with a blank page with a topic like, okay, queer characters in video games. And then the first thing is, well, what do I say about that? What one thing do I say about that? And so it's almost easier to skip like the intro paragraph and just start with each of the topics, like, okay, let's talk about social representations in media. And you can go through that because it's pointed, whereas how to introduce the whole thing, what to put in and what to leave out, and to know what your main argument or your main point is, that's harder. So this is why over time I like to write method sections, and I like to write result sections, because we know what goes in them. It's not a battle of 10,000 things in my head and which one do I say. But it's interesting, it's so great to share socially about writing, because otherwise we just have a tendency to be like, that's because I suck. Everyone else has got it figured out, and we don't.
And Wendy brings up a couple good follow-up questions too that we can discuss, which is she encourages us to think about, what are the trends or themes in our negative feelings about writing, but then also any trends, like, can you think about your positive experiences of writing and what made them good? Did anyone think of anything for that? Any common elements, either in your negative feelings or your positive experiences?
I was just going to go back and comment on the thing about having too many ideas, because I do that too. I just write word vomit in the first thing, and then I have several drafts, because I find it hard to, and then I organize afterwards. So, I mean, I don't know if that helps other people, but that's what I do. I literally write anything and everything that comes to my mind, and then each subsequent draft narrows it down and focuses, and I pull pieces.
One of my positive things when I write for anything is before I sit down, I do what I call the write and rip, and I write everything down, and then similar to the word vomit, and then I actually just rip it or throw it to the side, and then I write. And I think I always feel like I feel confident when I find my own way, and every day is a different way and a different spot that I've declared my writing spot.
I would say that I actually really do genuinely love writing, and just as much as I resist it and have all those thoughts, as soon as I get into it, even with the crappy parts about it, I'm doing it. So I'm just, relief is a huge part of it. I'm so relieved that I'm just doing it, that I'm making progress. And then I realize, of course I can do this. And I want to do it because whatever it is I'm writing about, I'm very excited about, I'm very passionate about, I want to say it. And I know, because I've been through the process so many times, there's a good chance that this is going to get published. And that's such a privilege to me. I cannot tell you, I was raised by a divorced mom. I'm our third child, and, my parents didn't go to college. And the whole idea that I have a voice and that I can contribute and write about something I really care about I just have so much joy in my heart about that. And I do like writing. It's just the resistance phase. It's like, don't want to do it, can't do it, hate it, no. And then as soon as I do it, I'm like, oh, this is so great. I love this. It is so great. I can't believe I get to be an author. I love this topic, So I do love it, but that doesn't mean it's easy for me. And I sit down and I immediately write a thesis sentence, It's not like that.
It's funny, I recall all the way back to 5th grade, there was 2 advanced class teachers, and everyone was like, you don't want this one, you don't want this one. She was like the Miss Trunchbull sounding person of the school, and I got her and I was frightened, and we thought she is so mean. Every single week, every single student had to write and memorize a 25-sentence speech and deliver it to the class. We thought she was the devil. Many decades later, that is like the best thing I've ever gone through, because as a 5th grader, every week I just sit down and do an intro paragraph, 5 sentences, 3 supporting paragraphs, 1 conclusion, and then I had to essentially memorize and remember it all and present it. And to me, that it seemed so terrible at the time, but for me, that got me over my fear of writing. So now if I have negative feelings when I'm writing, I realize it's because I don't know what I'm trying to say yet. And then that you know, I have to solve that and then I can come back to the real writing.
Ooh, that's a great experience and a great insight. That is one of the hardest things when, like I said, when you sit down with the topic, what am I going to say about this topic? The first paragraph is the hardest in many ways. And like I say, we're going to work on what is the argument, what is the point here that you're making, what is the title, you know, but those are harder than just reviewing the background and all of that. It's like you've picked the background because you know the gist, but yeah, what am I saying? Until you get sad about that, maybe you should write some of the other stuff. And then you should just talk to the people on the project with you, talk to your chair, whatever, realize what's the takeaway from this? What's the gist?
Yeah. And we get some good tips from Wendy this week. So jumping into Wendy, week 2, advancing your argument. So this is chapter 2 in our lovely book. If you don't have a copy, get the one with the green cover from 2019. Sorry, Holly. I know you got the first edition. We're going to start with some Mythbusters, busting myths about publishable journal articles. And there's 3 things that Wendy wants us to think about. First is that it's a myth that only profoundly theoretical or groundbreaking articles get published. In fact, most articles are not earth-shattering, and they're pretty narrow in their claims and context. Myth, only articles with lots of interesting ideas get published. In reality, articles get published for articulating one important idea and articulating it well. And the last myth is only entirely original articles get published. Really, most articles are openly derivative or imitative of prior scholarship. So Wendy thinks about this in a few different ways about what gets published and why, and what gets rejected and why. And I kind of took what she said into this table where you can think about, you essentially have an approach that you're taking and you have your evidence or your data, and that can either be old or new. And so a publishable article is organized around one important idea, one important new-ish idea that relates to previous scholarship. So in other words, we're trying to say something new about something old. There's 3 ways we can do this. First is you can approach new evidence in an old way. So you can get new data that supports, refines, redirects, or disproves a previously published theory, method, or scholarly argument. You can approach old evidence in a new way. So you can take an existing data set or multiple data sets and apply a new method or research design or theory that says something new about that existing data. Or finally, you can pair old evidence with old approaches in a new way. So you can link existing data and existing theories, methods, or scholarly arguments. So you might see that, hey, there's all this data out there around video game representation, and there's this theory about the video game theory, but no one's ever linked them together in a published article. So that could be your starting point. And then what gets rejected and why? The main reason journals reject articles is because the author does not have an argument, or they fail to state it early and clearly in the article. So they think they have an argument, but they didn't get it across quickly enough. That's the biggest thing that we can do that's in our control as authors, is make sure that we are articulating our argument very early and clearly in our manuscript. Beyond that, there's a lot of things out of our control. So articles can be rejected if the journal has recently published too many articles on a similar topic, argument, or methodology, or the journal might just have an abundance of good publishable submissions already. We can't control that as much, except, be okay knowing that we're not always going to get accepted, and it doesn't mean that our manuscript is not worthy of publication. Okay, we'll get on our soapbox here and then talk about creating a good argument. So really, writing starts with having a good argument that you're making. And really, all a journal article is a coherent series of statements leading from certain premises to a specific conclusion that attempts to persuade the reader to believe something. And Wendy breaks this down, an argument, into 5 components. First, an argument is your journal article's single significant idea stated in 1 to 2 sentences early and clearly in your article, and around which the rest of your article gets organized. It emerges from or links to some existing scholarly conversation, right? So based off of existing literature, and it's supported with evidence to convince the reader of its validity. So one more time, your argument is your journal article's single significant idea. You're going to say it in 1 to 2 sentences, early and clearly. Everything else in your article gets organized around that. And your argument is based on existing scholarly evidence, and you're applying some new something to convince people of its validity. How do you know if you have an argument? There's a few ways you can test this, starting with argument tests. One is an agree or disagree test. Can a reader respond to your argument with I agree or I disagree? If so, you probably have an argument. If there's nothing for anyone to disagree with, you probably don't. A gut test. When you say your argument aloud or the statement aloud, you should or could feel a little anxious or kind of feel that fight or flight response, right? Because you're being a little provocative, right? If you're not saying anything interesting, then there's no harm in saying it. An immediate dispute test. So when he tells the story about in a class where she has people go around and they have to say their argument, and the second that somebody says something, well, I disagree with, or I don't think, she cuts it off and moves on. Because if somebody can dispute what you're saying immediately, you have an argument. And then the puzzle answer test. This one I thought is a little more abstract, but think about, is what you're saying, is it a question that many people have wondered about and seek answers for? But I actually like the faux argument test a little bit more because they're a little more actionable to get started. The first one is the topic test. So making sure, are you going further than naming a subject? Your argument cannot be, I am studying representations in video games. That's your topic. An observation test. Does your argument statement stand alone, and can it be explained without interpretation needed? So it should be able to stand alone, and it shouldn't just sound like you're making an observation. I observe that these characters are mistreated in video games. Obvious test. Is your statement so broad that no reasonable person would ever dispute it? Video games have storylines. That's not an argument, that's just a statement. A variable test. This one I think is really good because part of our process of research, right, is understanding the variables that we're using if we're doing specifically quantitative. Your argument is not simply stating your variables of interest. So if I said, oh, I'm doing my dissertation on AI generated stories, and I'm looking at narrative transportation and perceptions of creativity. That's me describing my variables of interest. That's not my argument. A gap or overlooked test. Is your statement simply a claim for the value of the article as a whole? Right, so for example, we know there is a deficit of literature around queer representations in video games. That's an important statement. It's not our argument. It's simply saying, this is why we're doing this additional research. And then the speculative test, make sure that your statement or your argument isn't simply a prediction or conjecture, right? So you don't want, in this paper, I will argue that if aliens landed on Earth, we would all die in 3 days. So how do you make a strong argument? And this is the last section we have for this week. I really like how Wendy tells us to think like a detective, but write like a lawyer. And this is where we have to kind of separate our brains a bit as we're doing research and as we're writing about research. Because when we're conducting our research, we're examining every piece of evidence like a detective would, looking for links, digging deep, leave no stone unturned. But when you're writing up your article, you're making a case like a lawyer would before going into court. So you're going to present the evidence that supports your case. You're going to cross-examine the evidence that doesn't support your case, right? So you don't want to ignore other points of view or other research, but simply contextualize, we know that other studies have found blah, blah, blah. Here's why our study is still valid. But if there is evidence that neither contradicts or supports your case, you're just going to ignore it. So for example, for me doing my dissertation and I'm looking at narrative transportation, there's so much research on narrative transportation, and there's a whole lot of things that gets pulled into that has nothing to do with my topic. I'm just going to leave that out. It's not relevant to what I'm doing. I'm only going to pull in things, the papers that support my argument, or the ones that found contradictory results, and I'll pull those in and contextualize why I think I still have a relevant argument. And then make sure the jury or your reader always knows whom you're accusing of, what and why. Again, state your argument in 1 to 2 sentences clearly and early in your manuscript. And that is Wendy week 2. I'll just show everyone one last thing and then we'll be good for this week besides questions. But if we go
Can I respond to what you just said?
Oh, yes.
So I'm going to be brave and share my crappy writing with you. So while you were saying those things, I decided to write a crappy draft argument of the queer representations paper. So here's my crappy draft. What is the deal? Why are we writing this paper? So I wrote this. How we present fictional characters provides real social information to the audience. It makes a difference in the real world in terms of people's behaviors, thoughts, and feelings. Our cultural artifacts influence the audience's perceptions, attitudes, behaviors, and feelings toward the group in question, in this case, queer characters. And also representation is part of respect. If you don't represent characters, that's saying they're invisible, they're not part of culture. So that's like the gist of the beginning of that paper. Why are we even talking about this? And any feedback you have on my argument, please give it to me because it's the crappy first draft.
Anyone have a response? Okay, real quickly, the last thing I want to do is if you go into Asana, back to our template we looked at last week, we have our week 2 tasks. So week 1 is reading. So you're going to start reading the chapter. The next day is testing out your argument. So looking at your manuscript or like what Karen just shared with where she's at and testing out that argument. Is it good enough? Is it weak? Is this a claim? Is it my topic? Is it a clear argument? You're going to review your article for its argument and try to start revising your article around the argument. And there's instructions throughout in the Wendy book. So again, you want to put this into your own team's project. And, these are suggested due dates based off of the 12-week progress, but that's something good to talk with your team about because some of these tasks you might want to do together, especially if you're working on a group research project.
I'm glad we're doing the argument next week because you got to start from there. I believe that Wendy's right. And also that slide you had, Perry, where it had like the 4 things on the right, you could use that in in your spreadsheet. So if the spreadsheet that I had, mine was more like methodological and topical at the same time. Experiments about this, correlational studies about that. But you could do it. Can you show those things again? Those 4, where you had like the 4 things on the 4 things on the right.
Is it this one?
No, it's got like green check marks on the right.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, not that one.
this one?
Yes. Oh no, not that one. Maybe the next one. Yeah.
Gotta
this
be
is
this one.
it.
It's the last one.
Okay, sorry, I didn't have, I put the green check marks from some other slide in my head. So, you could categorize them like that. Does this article present evidence that supports your case? Like an experiment that shows people are more discriminating after they see a stereotypical representation. That's evidence that supports the idea that how you represent characters in fiction makes a difference in the audience understanding of that social group. Oh, look, I made out an argument. Write that down. Okay, doesn't support your evidence. If you want to put those in there, you could have that like, here's the grid. Does it support evidence? Is it supporting evidence? Is it contradictory? And you could classify that this is not about the argument we're making, and you have a check in that column. Yeah, and then the resting, but yeah, evidence for, evidence against, or unrelated. So then you could just take out all the unrelated. It's about video games, it's about whatever, but it's not about this argument. I think you could use that to either have the whole thing down, you're like, okay, I found all these articles. Is it evidence? Is it evidence against, or is it just irrelevant? You can figure that out. Oh, by the way, I should say, I think it's not that you can't cite a paper that would come under that third bullet. It's just, sometimes you can cite a paper and you're only citing it for one idea. Like, it's not even about video games, but it's about the fact that, I don't know, it's about like one little discrete fact, like, okay, so I remember Jim Potter wrote a book about media violence, and he said, media violence is the most studied topic in all of media psychology. So what if for some reason I want to make that point? I wouldn't in this particular paper, I don't think, but what if I did? So you could still have that paper somewhere. It's harder to know how to store those or how to classify those. Maybe sometimes they're closer to the actual argument. They're about video games, like, oh, how about, here's one. I always have used when I do a lot of video game research. How many people play video games? What kinds of people? So those are not about the specific argument, like X causes Y, but they're about games, and they may be good for a sentence in your paper, like most adults play video games and X% play, so they're not evidence about the case, they're not evidence about the argument, but little bits of information that are relevant, or sometimes it's a citation, but it's not about the argument.
Well, feel free, anyone reach out to me if you have questions over the week. And I'm not the expert, but I'm definitely championing this, so we'll get it figured out. Holly, it's in the main Asana group for Karen's research lab. If you are having difficulty, it's under Karen Shackelford's research lab, Holly Bevan. Go to the little avatar in the top right and double check that you're on the fielding.edu and not the email.fielding.edu, which we're either going to solve or find a new tool.
Yeah, I will mention that I think you've probably seen this somewhere, but we're at the limit of the number of people who can be in Asana. And so for the free account, so we're either going to have to figure out a workaround for that, or I started to use Microsoft Teams, which Stephen uses for his job, but he's having a baby, so okay. I excuse that, I guess, but I'm kidding, but I'm just like hugely perplexed by it. I understand there needs to be a commitment. I'd have to spend lots of time like getting to know that software. I like it because you can post files, and I think Asana is not great at sharing files. But I was having the darndest time figuring out some things, like they let you post it as a class, or they let you post it as some kind of nebulous collaboration, and I tried 2 different ways and it was just confusing me. The reason for trying Microsoft Teams is because Fielding buys it, and so we can have as many people as we want. Is anyone here someone who uses Microsoft Teams regularly? Or has used it enough to know what they're doing?
I do use it at SUNY. That's the application we use. I don't know a lot about it, but I use it fairly regularly.
What do you set up classes in it, or how do you work with
I set up basically I equate it to like Zoom meetings. You set up meetings where you can invite the whole class. And it's very similar in that function, but it has a lot more than just setting up meetings. Basically you go to the calendar and click out, you know, what time, what the meeting is about, and then invite people. I've recorded videos on there. It gets kind of wonky with recording videos and then trying to because I want all my students to have access to the videos, and it's like I have to have every student ask me for permission, and then I have to go in and like I have to figure this out how to just it won't give me broad access. That might be a SUNY thing. They kind of block you from whatever, but so yeah, I know some of the functionality of it.
Well, I think it could be that setting it up as a class that I did for one of the teams was a mistake. I thought I would just try that, but it became very confusing really quickly to me. They were like, I don't know, I couldn't understand it. I don't know if we can even keep using Asana though, if we have more than whatever it is, 10 people or something.
It's 15 total.
I mean, I don't know if like Andreas and I could have 2 separate ones, or that would just lead to brain explosions and it, you know, it just like wouldn't work either. It's so hard. This is the whole thing about running a virtual lab. You'd think like, fine, they share documents, blah, blah, blah. No, it's like, you gotta learn new software, you gotta pay for it. And it's like $1,200 a year or something. That's a huge investment. And Fielding's not giving me $1,200 a year. So then what, you know? I don't know, I can try one of the other, there's like 3 options for how you set up a Microsoft Teams group. I could try back the, whatever the collaboration thingy is, and see if that's any, all I want to do is share files, work on files together, send messages, and theoretically, it'd be nice to assign jobs, and I think Stephen did say you can do those Gantt charts in there or something. So anyway, maybe it's worth fooling around with some more. I don't have a strong feeling. Perry, do you think that we're going to have to just get out of Asana?
I'd like to do a count of how many people we actually have in the lab, because I feel like 15 is still, I don't think there's more than 15 people right now. But I have used Teams before in the past too, and that if we have, do we all have licenses for that?
I think so.
Okay. Did we get Microsoft through Fielding?
Yes.
Office? Okay.
Yes. And in the class one, it's like designates people as faculty or students, and everybody came up in the directory when I looked for your emails.
Okay.
It's just, there's too much in there, really. There's grading stuff and there's multiple tabs that seem to do the same thing. That's why I'm confused. I kept trying to do some simple things like send a note and I couldn't figure it out. But I do have to realize it does take time to learn software and it's not always intuitive. And so I'm expecting to go in there and just do it, and that's not happening. Well, maybe we should take a look back at who all's in there. Does everyone who's in there need to be in there, or is there somebody who's dropped out or doesn't really come to stuff, and we could drop them out of the Asana. I don't know.
Yeah, I can take a look at that. Since Stephen's gonna be a little occupied.
That's right.
I
Does anyone know if they've had their baby?
don't know for sure.
I'm gonna assume yes, based on the
He stopped
timeline we last
responding
heard.
to the emails.
Yeah.
So.
What's
So
his
I'm gonna
deal?
assume-
I'm gonna use my 80s voice for that. What is his deal? He needs to talk to us about research. He is the nicest person, isn't he? He's just such a lovely, lovely person and a hard worker. I'm happy for them. Okay, we'll try to get that sorted out, but hey, we're getting some stuff in the lab. We're gonna get some papers submitted. We're just know that we're doing way more than most people do. Most people just send everyone away to write, do not analyze it, do not care how they're feeling about it. And it's so much, it's not like we're suddenly like super squishy or something. So much in life is about what story you have in your head about it, what's stopping you from doing it. It's just practical, you know, and I think it helps immensely to hear other people's how they're struggling with it. It's quite illuminating. It's a very, very difficult process. I mean, it's less than 1% of people who get their PhD. And if most people who get their PhD and actually get a job are publishing zero, then if you ever, you know, present anything, submit anything, get anything accepted, just know that was a massive mountain that you have climbed, right? So be proud of that, you know, be proud of getting your PhD and be proud of pursuing this and understanding that all those things about how you can't do it, it's you can't figure it out, you're not smart enough, whatever. Those things are just normal things that can throw you off. And we're all here, we're your support team for saying everyone feels that stuff. It is really difficult, but I can also say after you've been through it, you realize there is a way forward. Like you can do this consistently and you just have to understand all the parameters, like be fine. You're not going to be super fine, but be fine enough with getting rejected. Understand that it's not because they're saying, wow, what an idiot, they can never do this. It's because of many different things, including luck. And take the feedback that you get, revise, keep doing it, and you'll be doing it. And you'll have made it past so many other people who have just veered off the path because it was too hard. You can do it, and there's ways to do it. And just things like this process of deciding, okay, so we've all got too many things in our head, there's too many articles, all that. Well, if you put this in this grid and you prioritize and all that, just think of what a better position you're going to be in than someone who doesn't know to do that, stays in overwhelm, never finishes it, or finishes it and is way too complicated. So we're just gonna, it's like we're runners here. We're gonna stick on the path. We're gonna keep doing it. We're gonna keep writing, and good things are gonna come of it. And you'll just be so strong for having gone through that process. And believe me, the rejection stuff, you know, we could all tell thousands of stories, but you put so much into anything and then you get a rejection, it's just so crushing, but you can't let it defeat you. You know, you have to find it in yourself to be like, it's okay. I still have what it takes. I still have something to say, and I'm going to keep trying. And then before you know it, you'll have those success experiences. You'll understand that you can, in fact, do it, and you're not doing it alone. So that's major. That's a huge, huge, huge like advantage you have over a lot of people, and it's a huge accomplishment.
Wendy gives a couple examples too in the book about just like non-academic writing, right? A lot of the people who have published what's still like the most groundbreaking or often cited works in their field had it rejected multiple times before it got published, and it's now one of like the most influential articles.
Yeah, I think I've shared with you. I'll
Reassuring.
give you the brief version. First article I tried to publish like after grad school on my own with like a couple undergrad co-authors. It wasn't rejected, it was revised and resubmit, but it was just so harsh that I could have just said, forget it. But I did what they asked. I had like my breakdown and then I re-engaged, did what they asked, and it got published in like years later, I saw that it was one of the top 20 most cited papers, and that friends of mine say they put it on their syllabus. And it actually was one of those things where it was actually a new method and a new thing. But you know, so rocks are going to be hurled at you, and you have to just hop out of the way and keep going. It's not because you entirely suck. It is not about you. It is just the journey, and you know, just don't let it take you out. I guess you keep going. Persistence is such a huge part of it. So I like to tell that story because, first of all, if you've been successful, people might just think it's so easy for you. And oh, that would be nice, but it's never going to be me. It's not. And you have to know everyone has had those boulders thrown in their way when they're trying to run down the road. And just when you have that moment, just know it's a boulder. Just keep running. You're standing up, you're running, keep doing it. That's all I have to say about that. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for everything you do for all of these projects. We're making great progress. And I'm excited for the summer. Thank you so much, Perry, for your leadership.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody. And a few of us are staying on for the
I
for
know.
teams.
Can
Yeah.
I refill my
everyone.
coffee and get my blood flowing again?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.